hearty welcome to everybody. And we have a very exciting program for you today. I hope you'll agree. Today's topic is the Yizkor books, or Jewish memorial books, that were predominantly from Eastern European cities and towns. And I want to thank those of you who submitted the names of places where your families came from. We have incorporated those names and places into a couple of slides, which with some sample covers of Yizkor books. And we're going to show those slides to you now. Ephraim? Here's the first one. I know the type is a little small, but it gives you a flavor of what some of the Yizkor books look like. And below are a number of the cities, towns, shtetls that have created those Yizkor books. There'll be a second slide in just a moment. Give you a second to read through the names, see if you can spot your family's town or city. And here's the second slide. This one features Radon and another book from the Rid of Us community in Lithuania. As we dig in, you'll find that there's a wide variety in what the books look like, and some variation certainly in what they contain. And thank you to Ephraim for creating these two slides, putting the information together on them. Okay, so we hope you enjoyed looking at that. So today we're going to discover what we can learn about the towns from Yizkor books, which were written by people who live there. And we're really fortunate to have a wonderful speaker today who can share with us her insights on the topic. It's Dr. Eliana Adler, who's an author, associate professor of history at Penn State University, and a historian of the modern Jewish experience in Eastern Europe. And in fact, she's currently in Poland. She's calling in from Poland, where she is conducting research on Jewish memorial books, today's topic. After Dr. Adler's presentation, we're going to have two brief videos about a very important resource for Yizkor books, the Dorot Division of the New York Public Library. And we will, following that, we'll have an opportunity for a brief Q&A with Dr. Adler. And so please post your questions for her in the chat at any time throughout this program. And in addition to posting questions for Dr. Adler, if you'd like to mention the town that your family came from, please go ahead and post that in the chat as well. Okay, now to the program. I am delighted to introduce Dr. Eliana Adler. Take it away.
Thank you so much for your introduction, for inviting me. I'm honored to be here today speaking to you about a topic that I love. I encountered my first Jewish memorial book, Yizkor book. I tend to use the Yiddish term, but I'll switch around different terms throughout my talk today. Sometime in the 1990s, I was applying to graduate school, and I was working in a university library cataloging Judaica books. And my job was to do the really easy stuff. I would enter in the title, the author of a book, and then my supervisor would do the complicated parts and find the Library of Congress number and that sort of thing. one day, a book came across my desk that I literally couldn't figure out anything about. It had 3 title pages, 2 on the right-hand side, one in Yiddish and one in Hebrew, one on the left-hand side in English. So how was I to put in 1 line of title in this cataloging record? It had a list of 12 different authors. A committee had written it. I couldn't fill in the author. I could not figure out anything about this book. I couldn't even figure out what language it was in many languages. So I failed in my job, but I spent the whole rest of the day looking at the book, utterly fascinated. And since that time, I have used Yizkor Bicher in my teaching. I bring them into the classroom. In my research, I use them on various projects. But it only occurred to me fairly recently, within the past few years, that I could actually use them as a subject of study, that I could study these books. And that's what I've been doing now for the past couple of years, is working on writing a history of this genre, this, to me, endlessly interesting genre of books. So I'm going to share with you some kind of introductory remarks about the books today, and then answer questions, hopefully, that you have. So first of all, I just want to point out in the opening slides, we saw some of the English translations, and I'm going to talk a little bit about translation later in my talk, but you'll see the originals look like this. And I just want to make the point that I'm going to be, I'm trying to speak for a half hour here, so I'm going to be making some broad general remarks. But this particular image I use partly to point out that each one is different. Each of these books is about a particular town, and that town was unique and special, particularly to the people from there. And so even though I'll be speaking generally, as we can see from these covers, how they wanted to represent their town, what they, sort of the emotional tenor. You can see the large one, the Yizkor Buch Pulav, is very funerary in theme, whereas Sefer Lansut on the right with the deer is, more, a very different style. All of them are black, except for the book from Plotsk, which is a less somber color. So they each are using different symbols and colors and iconography to present themselves on the outside as well as on the inside, of course. So what are Yizkor Bicher? The term in Yiddish or in Hebrew, the Sefer Zikaron, in English memorial book, can potentially be very broad. We might say a yearbook, a high school yearbook is a kind of memorial book, or memory book certainly, or a photo album is a memorial book of our lives, of our homes, of our past. And all of that is true. But so to differentiate this particular genre, I find it useful to think of 3 main qualities about them. And that is that they are communal, collaborative, and commemorative. So they are communal in the sense that they represent an entire Jewish community from a particular place. They try, they don't always succeed, but they do try to include lots of different groups from that community, not to show just one past, but to show a multivocal past with lots of different people living different lives all together. They are collaborative in the sense that they were literally written by committee, and with everything that that means. There's repetition, there's contradiction, there's very many different voices and styles. It can be positive in many ways, it can be negative in certain ways, but the books were written by committees from Landsmannschaften, from organizations based on people coming from the same town. So this is a Landsmannschaft in Argentina. You can see a picture of them. They would send in materials, the same Landsmannschaft from the same town, from different cities in Canada, from other places in Europe, mostly Western Europe, although sometimes Eastern Europe as well, from different places in North America, South America, Australia, sometimes South Africa, and certainly Israel. People were all sending in their materials together into these collaborative books. So that certainly makes them very unusual. And of course, possibly most importantly, they're commemorative. The whole goal of these books is to commemorate lost communities, their eulogies. And that's important in how we think about them. So that's by way of definition. In terms of purpose, most of the books have an introduction wherein the editors try and explain what it is they're trying to do with this book. And again, each one is different, but there are some common themes in these introductions that one hears with some frequency, different versions of them. But here, a particularly beautiful one that has really stuck with me that I just want to read a little bit of is from the Drahichin book. And the editor, Rabbi Dov Varshavsky, says, there can be no better or more enduring monument than this Yizkor book. It is a gravestone of holy letters that can never be erased. Gravestones of wood and stone are not immortal. Wood rots and burns. Stone can be dug up and broken off. A gravestone of letters, however, lives forever. So it's a bit unintuitive, right? We might think that a book is made out of paper. Has less endurance than these more heavy, seemingly permanent types of monuments. But many of the editors are at pains to say that these are better monuments. They're stronger, they're more meaningful for all sorts of reasons. There's also recurring themes of the substitute grave, which we see in the Sefer Yizkor Likdoshe Pshaich, that it will serve as a substitute grave. That's that comes up a lot. Below that, we have the eternal light for the Ostrov Mazovietsk book, also a frequent sort of symbol in thinking about what is the purpose of these volumes. Contents. The books are surprisingly broad, and what I think is, what I particularly want to emphasize is that you might think, if you haven't looked at these before, and I know many of you have, that they would really be about the Holocaust. That's seemingly the point. These are books about the losses of the Holocaust. And of course, that is central to their purpose. But what is surprising to me is how much of the books, just in terms of pure space, is devoted to the pre-war period. So if you look at just this one example here, which is Pinchas Bendin, you'll see that the section on the Holocaust begins only at Chet, which is the 8th section of this book. So everything before that includes history of the town, includes youth groups, personalities, political parties, all sorts of other topics. And only really toward the end does the Holocaust appear. And this is just one example, but one of many. That's very common, that the books are, first of all, enormous, and second of all, that although the Holocaust section is very important, it's in terms of pages, maybe a fifth, a fourth of the book. And there's some post-war, a little bit about the post-war, especially about the Landsmannschaften. And then there's a lot of pre-war. Pre-war is really the main content of these books. So the books are mostly words, but not only. And I'm attempting to get to the next slide now. Trouble. There we are. They also contain images. And these images include photographs. All of the books have photographs, and these were usually sent in, like the testimonies and essays and memoirs. These were sent in by people, by Landsmannschaften members. They were sometimes, as you can see, posed photos of youth groups, of political parties. Sometimes they were pictures of the town. In the case that we're looking at here, this is the Book of Radom with these photographs. That book has them all in one section. I think it's a little more common, I would say, to have them spread out throughout the book. So every page or two, another photograph. So that's the primary type of imagery, I would say. There's also documents in the books. So here's a historical document. It's the sort of gray colored one in Yiddish here, to show something about the culture from this town. There's also artwork. The frontispiece of the book from Zamość has this very lovely picture of the castle from which Zamość draws its name, and the main square of the town. That's something that was somebody's way of remembering. Instead of writing an essay, they wanted to draw something. And maps. Most, but not all of the books have hand-drawn maps, which are not generally to scale. They're not sort of official cartographic maps. They're often very, what we call memory maps. Somebody remembering what it was like in a particular place with, I mean, as you can see in this case, there's a drawing of the synagogue, of different elements in the town. The maps are very charming and very informative, and also can be somewhat chilling. And in this particular case, what I think is fascinating about this map is that on the one hand, you see this lovely pre-war town, but in the bottom right-hand corner, this is the map of Jedwabne, there's a burning barn. So this image from the Holocaust has been superimposed on the town, and it doesn't take over the whole map, that you still see the pre-war town, but you also see its destruction taking place. A number of scholars have tried to count these books, which is not a simple thing at all. It partly depends how we define them. The broadest definition of post-Holocaust Jewish memorial books comes to about 1,000 different texts. For those that are particularly devoted to Poland, that would take us down to, oh no, let's see. For those that are produced by Landsmannschaften, that is not by individuals, that would take us down to about 700. And then of those, the ones that come from Poland, approximately 500. And this is a tremendous map, really a huge piece of work done by Adam Kapczowski, who's a professor in Lublin. And it's in his book, Tam byl kiedyś mój dom, that was once my house, about, but it's in Polish, about these books and with excerpts. It's a jointly edited book. He wasn't the only author, but he did make the map. So the map shows all of the Yizkor within the pre-war borders of Poland, not the post-war borders. And what's hard to see, I admit, because of the just how small it is that the little green dots are places where there are two, not just one, but two memorial books. And the little reddish dots are places where there are three or more dots. And here again, just the variety is sometimes surprising. So there's towns and cities that, of course, Vilna, of course, there's going to be three or more books about Vilna. Huge community, important, one of the most important, historical. But then Volkovitsk, which is a little bit south there, not obvious that would be a place that there would be so many books about. It's not necessarily the size and the importance. It just depends who made the books, when they made them, who they included and who they excluded, because sometimes another group wasn't totally satisfied and wanted to make their own book. The books had their heyday in terms of publication in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And they were coming out, and they were not only of interest to the people from those towns, but also more widely. So on the right-hand side here, I have a book review of the book of Kutna and surroundings in one of the Yiddish newspapers. There were actually three in Paris in 1968. So it's a very positive review saying what a great book this is and how any community that hasn't yet made their book should take their example from the community of Kutno and its area. So people were interested in these books, were in this period, were taking them seriously. However, in subsequent period, really after the 1970s, both the publication of these books declined quite precipitously, and interest in them did. Of course, they were still very important to the survivor generation, to the refugees who had put them together. But on the whole, their children were not that interested in the books, and in many cases didn't have the language skills to read them. And historians often saw these books as quite amateurish, not real history, and not really worth their time and effort. So that's sort of a quick story of the books. Part of what I'm interested in my work is looking at where they came from, because what's remarkable to me is that by the 1950s, that there were these thick, robust books. So where did they come from? How did survivors and refugees know that this was a genre, that this was a way to memorialize, that this was one of the most important ways to memorialize their losses? And there's a couple different streams that come into these books, and what I've called here their evolutions. So one that we might discuss is post-war pamphlets. So right after the war, immediately after the war, in the late 1940s, there were a number of early Yizkor that came out, but are really more pamphlets than books. So these three examples here, one from Vilna, one from Podlosha, which is Biała Podlaska in Poland, and one from Nowy Dwór, are each a little bit different. They were, the Nowy Dwór book actually was produced by a Landsmannschaft, by a committee, whereas the Vilna and Podlosha books were produced by one individual. You can see there's an author there, Feigenboim, and Szmerka-Kasarczynski made the Vilna book. So they have some of the elements of the later books, and some parts they don't have. They are pretty much only about the Holocaust. They have lists of names. They have the necrology. They don't have very much at all about the pre-war period. They don't have a lot of images. The book on Vilna does have some historical documents in them, so each is a little different. And they were also produced in different places. The book from Podlosha was actually printed in Munich, so it was by a a Jew who was in a DP camp at the time when he put it together, whereas the Novi Dvor book was printed in Los Angeles by the Landsmannschaft, but they were gathering some materials from members who were still in Europe or who had come recently from Europe. So that's kind of the first stage. And then the books expand in the coming decade. And one of the ways that they expand, in my understanding, is that once the survivors and refugees from the war got settled in whatever new community they moved to, they joined the local Landsmannschaft there. And oftentimes that group already had a tradition of making Yovel books or souvenir journals, that is, yearly journals about what the Landsmannschaft was doing. So here are two examples from New York, from different Landsmannschaften, and both of these are pre-war. You can see 1939 and 1935, the kind of books that, pamphlets really, that these Landsmannschaften would put out yearly for their members. And they are aesthetically and in terms of content, we can see a lot of continuities between these books and the later Yizkor Bicher. So they are another stream that went into them and helped to kind of fatten them up and make them more diverse and larger. So there's this period, as I said, from the 1950s through the 70s of their expansion. They get bigger and they spread. And then there's the period of kind of decline of interest in the books. And that could have been the end of the story. And for me, I'm a historian, it still would have been a very interesting story. I'm used to writing about the past. But in fact, the books have, in recent decades, have what I'm calling here an afterlife. That is, they had this decline, lack of interest for a while, and now they're back, and they're back in different and surprising ways. So the first step is definitely the activities possible on Jewish Gen, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with and involved with Jewish Gen. One of their, starting in 1999, once they got legal permission to do so, they started putting excerpts translated into English from Yizkor Bicher on their website, and eventually entire books, and eventually also printing those books so that people can hold an English language book and read the entirety of it, just as their parents or grandparents might have held the Yiddish or Hebrew version, or more likely Yiddish and Hebrew mixed version. So that has been a huge game changer and garnered a lot of interest for the books. One of the possibly most surprising and kind of unexpected consequences of that is that once you put something online, anyone can find it and read it. And it happened that people in Poland who are from these towns, who are not Jewish, but are interested in local history, began to do searches online for anything they could learn about their town, wherever it might be, and discovered that there was actually entire books written about their town, from Jews who used to live there. And there has been, in the past 10, 15 years or so, a great interest in Jewish memorial books in Poland, and they're being used in a number of ways. And that's actually what I did this summer. I've been here for 2 months now, interviewing people about how and why they are using Jewish memorial books in their home communities. So just to give a thumbnail sketch, some of the activity is translation, just wanting the books to be available in Poland so that everyone in their town can read about what life was like there during the interwar period and also during the Holocaust. Sometimes they're being used in fragmentary ways, not translating the whole book, but using pieces of it. So on the right here, this is a photograph I took from a very small museum in a very small town. It is really still a shtetl, or because there aren't Jews there, a miasteczka, of Wojsławica, or Wisławiec in Yiddish. And that museum has translated pieces of the memorial book and made them into these thick pages so that they actually have this book, which isn't the entire book, it's only a tiny piece of it, but out, so that people can leaf through the book and see images and words from the Jewish memorial book in this museum about their own town. The books are also being used for educational purposes and by artists. And I think that it's still developing. We don't know all the ways that these books are going to be used. And finally, I just want to make a couple of points about the richness of these texts, all the things that one can find within them: Holocaust history, local history, names, testimonies, aftermath. I don't have to read them all, but there's just a great deal there that you can find, and sometimes surprising pieces like linguistics. They tend to retain often very particular local dialect for describing. If they say the name of the stream that came through the town, they'll use the name of the stream that was used in 1922. Maybe people don't even remember that name anymore in that town. So some of the Polish people who are reading these books are finding fascinating little pieces of their own realia in them. Also, certainly for Yiddish linguistics, they're very interesting. The Hebrew tends to be interesting in a different way, in that it's the Hebrew of sort of Hebrew high schools from the pre-war period. It's not modern Hebrew exactly. It's a very formal, kind of literary, a little bit old-fashioned type of Hebrew, which also captures a moment in time. So there's a great deal there. There's literature, poetry, folklore, maps, and I guess I would make two final points. First of all, is just that on the one hand, there's all this wealth there. I guess I would make two caveats. One is that if you're reading it in translation, you're probably not getting all of it. And some of these translations are a little bit slapdash. They're volunteer projects. They're people doing the best they can to get this information out there and available. But particularly for the literature, for the poetry, for the religious texts, there's a lot that's being lost along the way, as with any translation. And the other caveat I would make is just to remember, as you use these books, if you do use these books, and if you will use these books, that they are primarily works of memory and of commemoration, and that they don't actually make a claim to be history. There's a lot of history in them, but there's mostly a lot of memory, a lot of history filtered through the losses of the Holocaust, of dislocation, of everything that came afterward. So that's my introduction, and I believe now there will be a couple of films and then a chance for questions and answers.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. So much information. I thought I knew a little bit about Yizkor books, but there's so much more to explore now. I spotted a couple of towns related to my family. I'm going to go research them like right after this program. So thank you so much. And you're right. We're going to turn now to a couple of videos, which I think I've been seeing a lot of queries in the chat about people's towns. And I think these next couple of videos will be helpful. The first video is really just sort of an introduction to the Dorot Division of the New York Public Library, telling you a little bit about a number of resources that are available through there. And then we'll go right into the second video, which is specifically about the Yizkor books.
Hi, so before we get into the Yizkor book portion of this presentation, I just wanted to give a brief overview on the Dorot Jewish Division. So we have subject highlights in Jewish people in the United States, Yiddish theater, oral histories, and periodicals throughout the world. We also have a lot of general resources on Holocaust research. This includes topics like Soviet Jewry or Holocaust literature, and goes into things like the ghettos that were functioning during the Holocaust. We have a lot of primary resources as well, narratives, and we're especially rich in memoirs from all around the world. This includes our American Jewish Committee oral history collection. We have a lot of interviews with Holocaust survivors that go into depth about the different regions that these people lived in and how the Holocaust came about. We also have biographical dictionaries. They can be more general, like Who's Who in American Jewry, and they can also get more specific, like the Encyclopedia of the Righteous Among the Nations and Rescuers of Jews During the Holocaust. We have a lot of Jewish genealogy guides, a lot of general ones, and some that are more tailored to a specific region. We have books on name origins and dictionaries, again, also categorized by region or by different areas. We have a lot of encyclopedias, including Pinkas HaKehilot. This is constantly mentioned, and it's a wonderful resource for town statistics and town names. We also have a collection of gazetteers like Where Once We Walked and Shtetl Finder. These are great for areas that might no longer exist after the Holocaust. We also have a collection of registers and directories. A lot of these are digitized already online on Ancestry or JewishGen, but we do have some of these on microfilm in the reading room, so you're free to look at these in person. We also have a variety of general resources on Jewish New York, like Synagogues of New York City, different biographical books on different regions of New York as well. And we have specifically collections on Landsmannschaften and Jewish communal organizations. These offer a lot of information for genealogical research and for understanding immigrant life more fully. We also have local periodicals on microfilm. This includes the Forverts, Morgan Journal. Some of this has already been digitized, but there are later years that are not yet online, so you can see those in the Dorot Jewish Division. And we also have World Jewish periodicals of different languages, different countries, and different time periods. And finally, we also have a lot of unexpected resources like cookbooks, ephemera, and postcards. These can offer some valuable information about the time period in which your ancestor lived, or just the area and the occupation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague to speak more in depth about Yizkor books.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm here to tell you about the Yizkor book collection at the New York Public Library. So I will share my screen with you, and we can take a look at the collection and how it works. So this is our homepage for the Yizkor books at the New York Public Library, and just go to yizkor.nypl.org. Now, I won't tell you about the collection of the Dorot Jewish Division besides the Yizkor books, because our time is limited, but I just want to say we have a lot of primary and secondary sources that might be useful to you in your research, and we're happy to tell you about that. So today I'm going to just tell you a little about the Yizkor book collection and how to use it. So the library has about 700 Yizkor books, and 85% of them were digitized in partnership with the Yiddish Book Center. So 85% of these books are available online. We also keep them available in the library for your use at all times during open hours. So you're welcome to come in and use the books in person as well. So here's our site, which serves as a finding aid and also as a informational guide to the Yizkor book. So let's go to that site, yizkor.nypl.org. So here we are, and there's two ways to search the guide. One is in the search box here, you can simply search by the name of a town. If you're not sure about the spelling, you could simply search alphabetically and find it that way. Or you could also use the JewishGen site. They have a town finder function, which allows you to type in the name of a town phonetically, and they'll pull up the closest matches. So we have a question today. The question is, are there any relatives of Samuel Rubinstein of Markuszów, Poland, that we can find in a Yizkor book for that town? So we know that Samuel emigrated before the Second World War, and that his parents were named Sholem and Sora, and that he may have left them or some other relatives behind in the town. So we're looking for information about them. So we can check, first of all, to see if there is a Yizkor book for the town of Markushov, which we see here it is. So we can also see that the book has been digitized. It's available in New York Public Library's digital collections and in the Yiddish Book Center site. So the Yiddish Book Center site's PDFs are preferable because you can download them. You can also search them with optical character recognition. So we advise that people should use the Yiddish Book Center site. So we're looking for the Yizkor book for Markushov. And here it is. We can download it and or we can view the book online. So we can look at the book, and in a lot of cases, the table of contents and the index are actually in the back of the book. So here's the title page, and it just goes right into the introduction, and we don't really see any kind of table of contents. So let's go to the back of the book and see if we can find it there. So let's see. Here we go. So this is the table of contents. So we'll look at the different sections. The first part is about the history of the town. The second part is about the religious, political, and cultural life in the town. And aid organizations and memories of specific personalities. The second part concerns the Second World War period. So what we're looking for is something like a list of people in the town who were killed by the Nazis, or information about family members that might have memorialized their families in the book. So as we look at this section, there is a part on page 389 called Regime von umgekommene Juden bez der Okkupatie, a list of Jews who were killed during the occupation. Below that, there is necrologen, necrologies. These are sort of memorials that people put in print in the book. So let's go to the page 389, the list of people who were killed during the war. So you can page through this book online if you find that a little difficult. You could also request the physical book if you're able to come in, or you could ask our staff to help you. So here is the list of Jews that were killed during the war. And we're going to go to the letter Resh to look for Rubinstein. Now, these are supposedly in alphabetical order, but the order is, not always strict. So here we go. Let's just zoom in a little bit. So here we say Rubinstein. There's actually a lot of Rubinsteins here, and it's a relatively common name, but we're looking for the names Sholem and Sora. So here's a Sholem Rubinstein. We also see that there is a Sholem Wolf Rubinstein, and we see a number of other Rubinsteins. So we don't know exactly if they're related, but that information is helpful to have. Let's also look at the necrology section and see if we can find any more. And these lists are not exhaustive. They're based on the information that people were able to gather at the time. So there are a lot of other sources for checking if you don't find what you're looking for in here. So here are the necrologies, which are basically tributes, memorial tributes placed by people from the town commemorating their relatives. And let's see again, this is in alphabetical order. So let's see if we can find anything under the name Rubinstein. So here we go. We find an entry from Aaron Rubinstein on page 419, where he describes in Hebrew his father, Sholem Rubinstein, and his mother, Sora Bela. And he describes a bunch of other relatives, and he gives dates of their birth and how old they were or how many children they had. So this information is all helpful to for further research. So we know now, according to this information, that Aaron Rubinstein probably may have made Aliyah based on the fact that this is in Hebrew, and he's memorializing his family here. So we can use this information to try to find other details about the family. Not every Yizkor book has these pages. Not every Yizkor book will have an index or a table of contents or these types of lists, but these are a very common feature. So I'm going to go back to the presentation for now. And let's look at a few other resources we could use. So you can do an optical character recognition search. That is a Google keyword type of search in the Yiddish Book Center's collection, which includes the digitized Yizkor books. So that's a little bit of a shortcut. It's not always 100% reliable. And especially if the name is common, you might get too many results, but that's one way to search. There's also a site called Genealogy Indexer, which let's just take a quick look at that. Allows you to search about 364 Yizkor books, so about half of the library's collection, again, with an OCR keyword search. And the neat thing about this is that you can do the search in the Latin, Hebrew, or Cyrillic alphabet, and it'll come up with results. And it also has other types of records that you can search. Also, the Jewish Gen site is very useful in terms of Yizkor books because it has many features, including translations, English translations largely of Yizkor books, a necrology index, a bibliographic database where you can find out if a Yizkor book was published for the town that you're researching, and a lot of other great resources. So this is something that we frequently use. We work a lot with Jewish Gen, and they have a wonderful site. They also have a number of other databases where you can look for information about individuals, and it's a very great site. We also use the Yad Vashem site. So if you find information in a Yizkor book, you can try to corroborate that or find more information, especially in the central database of Shoah victims and other resources that they have available. So before I conclude, I just want to say that we also have a few other sites that are useful. So I'm just going to go back into the research guide for a moment. So in terms of the research guides that the library has, in addition to the Yizkor books, you can see that for Jewish studies, we have several different guides. I just want to draw your attention to the Holocaust Research, Education, and Remembrance Online Guide, which includes a genealogy section. So here you could find information about other websites, especially where you can search for information about individuals. As the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum notes on their website, there is no single list of victims and survivors of Nazi persecution. Instead, researching individuals' stories during the Holocaust is a process of following trails and piecing together bits of information. So here are some other places where you can find records about individuals. The New York Public Library largely does not collect records about individuals, but we can refer you to other organizations that do. We also offer free research consultations, and those can take place virtually or in person. You do not have to have a New York Public Library card or be a New York resident to have a free consultation. We also offer free genealogy classes, so we hope that you will take advantage of those. So in terms of what we can do, we can help you find Yizkor books and other relevant sources, meet with you to talk about your research, help you search the table of contents and index, and provide links to other research resources outside the library. We cannot, however, conduct extensive research on your behalf or provide translations. So thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing from you. Yizkor books are a very important and heavily used part of our collection, and we also have a number of other resources that could be helpful to you. So we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much for joining us.
So that was a lot of information packed into a short period of time, and I want to remind everyone that you will be receiving a link. I'm not sure if it'll be immediately following this, but I think it'll take a little bit, but you will be receiving a link to the recording of this program, so you can have time to look at your leisure or re-review the program. I'm going to turn you, we're going to now go to the Q&A portion of the program. So Rachel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, we do have several questions. I'm not sure if Dr. Adler is going to be able to answer all of them, but they're all so interesting. The last one I saw was a question about getting translations from Yiddish. Someone has letters and postcards or some. I have family letters in Yiddish from 1920 to 21, and no one in the family speaks Yiddish. Where would someone go to get something like that done?
On the website of the Center for Jewish History in New York or of the YIVO Institute, they both have recommendations for translators from Yiddish and from Hebrew. You can see separately. A Jewish Gen also has a list of translators whom they recommend. So those would be good places to start. National Yiddish Book Center as well, to go to some of those organizations and use some of their professional translators.
Okay, thank you. Would that be the same for other languages as well as Yiddish?
Those are particularly the case for Yiddish and Hebrew.
Okay. And Polish, where would people go for Polish translations?
We'll go for Polish. I mean, there's also, of course, there's always graduate students who are, looking for a little extra money. There are different sites like Upwork and other places where people, there's even someone on this site who does Polish translation, but there are sites where people aggregate, these different skill sets that they have, and one can use those to find people to do different translations.
Thank you. Now this gets difficult because I know we can't ask you about everybody's town, and people did list their towns before and during this program. But question came in from Bob Olesh. Are you aware of any books about Slonin, Belarus, Poland? Slonim.
So Slonim certainly has a book. It's a big place, but yes, as you said, I do not know all of the books. I have not read all of them, and so I happen to know that one off the top of my head. But I would have to look up, just as you all would, to find out for all of those little towns. And as I say, sometimes they are surprising.
Well, thank you. The next one is the post-war DP camp publications were similar in that they had Troyer academies to preserve the memories of lost communities. Is that a word, Troyer?
Yeah.
Could you explain that to us? And then have you seen references to those?
So the Troyer Akademin were usually events rather than publications, that they were memorial events that took place in the DP camps with people all from the same place. Troyer meaning sad, meaning mourning. So yeah, there are all sorts of kind of precedents that come together. There were in the DP camps, people were also building physical monuments as well as these monuments in words. They were raising money often to put up monuments back in their hometowns, or sometimes even in the camps, in memory of their hometowns.
Okay. Another specific question from Stichler. Is there a Yizkor book specifically for Halaby, Poland? Now Ukraine? Don't know. Okay.
I just don't know.
That's good. We hope that you can't possibly know all of these. And then I have a question about how you pay. How did they finance these books? Did people have to pay to put a necrology in? How did that work?
So the books were pretty much financed on, what's that word when you pay in advance for your copy? That is, people were asked to sign up for their book, even when the book wasn't ready. And sometimes it was 8 years out, but they would make their deposit. And that was a lot how they were financed. Or sometimes one person, one relatively wealthy person within the Landsmannschaft would put forward some funds. but they are not, they're not very high quality. Like the photographs are not well copied. The pages are very thin. The covers are nice, but they're not expensive books. They're kind of simple books and with minimal amount of extras in them. So that the idea was that everyone in every version of the Landsmannschaft from that place would be able to buy a book.
Okay. And so where did they sell the books afterwards? Did they sell the books afterwards?
Not precisely. I mean, the people bought them on subscription, the people in that group. And then if there were extras, often they were given to libraries in the hopes that other people would read these books, or sent out to other important people who were from that place or from nearby. So different, they were sold at the meetings of the Landsmannschaft for anyone who hadn't bought theirs in advance, but they weren't really like in bookstores exactly.
Okay. Barnes and Noble didn't carry them, huh?
Not yet.
When was the first Yizkor book written?
So it partly depends how we define what is a Yizkor book, but some of these in the DP camps came out as early as 1946, but it isn't till more like 49 or 50 that we begin to see these more expansive volumes that aren't just a thin necrology and a couple of stories about the Holocaust.
Okay. And another question I had from several people was, why isn't their family listed in the Yizkor book?
Yeah. So the Yizkor Bücher are like a snapshot in time. It's exactly what they knew in terms of the names in 1958 or 1972 or whenever that particular book came out. And it's also whom they were able to contact. So I've spent a lot of time in the files of the Landsmannschaft, and they're every week sending out and every month sending out announcements asking people, please send in your names, please send photographs, send stories, send money for these books that we're putting together. But people would only get those announcements if they were members of the Landsmannschaft. They also did come out in Yiddish papers. So in those French Yiddish paper that I showed an image from, there were also frequently, this Yizkor book is requesting, this committee is requesting information from people from this place, but it's not ever really possible to reach everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So some people never knew, didn't find out in time. They weren't members of a Landsmannschaft. They lived someplace where there wasn't a Landsmannschaft, and they didn't send in their information. And also, it wasn't possible to do a lot of research in the communist countries. There was some research coming out from there, but in the time when many of these books were coming out, so there's a great deal of information that they just didn't know, didn't have access to, couldn't have known at that moment in time. One of the things that some of the newer publications, the translations of the books are doing is trying to update the lists. Polish versions and the English versions are sometimes adding in names. And incidentally, the older versions often had a blank page with the understanding that we didn't catch anyone, so you write your own names in.
Wow. Is there an index of Yizkor books available in the United States and Israel? Ernest asked.
There have been indices created at different moments. So, for example, in the publication From a Ruined Garden, which is a really excellent compendium of pieces from different Yizkor Bücher translated, and a great introduction by Jonathan Boyarin and Jack Kogelmas, at the back of that, Zachary Baker made an index of that time. The second edition was, I don't know, 1995 or something. The first edition was 1985. I don't remember the exact years. But again, the indices are also a snapshot in time, and they're not always quite complete. But also this, most recently, this only works for pre-war Polish borders, but the map that I showed from this book in Polish is quite up to date for Polish towns, because it only came out a couple of years ago.
Okay, a couple last questions and then we'll turn it over, if that's okay with you. Susan Golden is asking us to remember early books about the pogroms that were destroyed towns in post-World War I. So there were Yizkor books. Those were considered Yizkor books as well?
They're a type of Yizkor book, and they're certainly a precedent for these later post-war books. They're different, they're sort of their own version, because those communities still existed when the pogrom books came out. They're tragedies that happened there, but the communities were still there. They weren't writing about completely decimated places in the same way as the post-war books were.
Thank you. One last question. I have a few volumes of a series called Fun Neunten Over from the recent past. Can you talk about them? Do you know
I'm not sure about that particular collection.
Okay. Well,
Sorry.
that's from Miriam Isaacs. Maybe Miriam can get information for us and we can share it at another time.
Yes, I can talk to Miriam about it.
Okay. I think we end usually at 10 after, quarter after, so I'm going to turn it over now. And I guess I think I see all the questions. So thank you so very much, and over and to our next speaker.
I am Dina Hirsch. I'm a member of the Generations After Board as well as the Program Committee. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Adler for her extraordinary contribution to today's program. I know that my brother has a copy of the Yizkor book for our parents community, but I will be looking at it differently now. Thanks so much to the Program Committee for your hard work and creating this program. And thanks to Ephraim Katsir for his outstanding technical assistance. And we extend our sincere appreciation to each of you for participating in the program. We were very gratified to see how many of you, when you registered, indicated the communities that represent your families. After the program, you'll receive a feedback survey, which we'd appreciate your completing and sending back to us because it helps us to determine what our future programs will be. If you're interested in becoming involved in our organization, please contact us at generationafterdc@gmail.com. And as we end the program, we hope that you will enjoy this musical video of the Yiddish classic Mein Städtele Belz by Dudu Fischer. It's about someone fondly remembering his Eastern European hometown. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and please be sure to join us for future events. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Mein Städtele Belz, mein Heim, alle dort, wo ich hab meine kindersche Jahren verbracht. Bist du gewesen amul im Belz, mein Städtele Belz, mein Heim, alle dort, wo ich hab meine kindersche Jahren verbracht. Jeden Schabes pfleg ich laufen mit alle Jüngerlach gleich, sitzen unter die grüne Bäume, Malach warfen, steht Allach in Teich. Welt, mein steht alle Welt, mein Heim, alle dort, wo ich hab meine Kinder